Okay, so it looks like people are rolling in. We'll give just a couple of minutes. Attendees are flowing in heavily right now.
Great.
The baby shower will be a fun one, Kit, for
Yeah,
two
well,
of your staff, right?
Well, you know both of them. Yeah, Ashley and Ari. So it'll be fun. It's Western themed. We had to figure out something. So.
Are they leaving you then, Kit?
One has retired. She quit. She's our trainer, and she her last day was last December 31st. But the other one's, full-time property manager. She's taking some time off. So one of the other property managers is covering her business. But yeah, she's gonna stay with us.
Good.
So can't lose anybody over a baby or any other reason.
Okay, still have a few people rolling in, but I think we can go ahead and get started just because we're going to be a little bit crunched on time. So I did see Brad Larson was registered, so I'll give him a little shout out with his hand start thing. And before we get going, just a quick word from our Pseudo sponsors. So Showdigs, they do offer property management field work for those efficiency and service property managers. They'll offer showings and inspections to be performed by licensed real estate agents. Now, if that sounded like a shameless plug from a Showdigs employee, trust your judgment. I'm Nick, I work with Showdigs, and I'll be monitoring this session today. Also a shout out to NARPM. Almost every one of these panelists that we have with us today, we've met through the NARPM community. It's a really great way for you to network with both other property managers and affiliates to help you understand how other property managers are responding to things like COVID or any sort of ongoing kind of instance of discussion. So, if you're not a member, definitely recommend that you sign up. If you let them know that you're referred by Showdigs, you will get $50 off of your membership. Now on to our panelists. NARPM, a great transition into our first panelist. We do have Kellie Tollifson with us today. She has over 20 years of property management experience. She's the owner of T-Square Properties. She holds an MPM and RMP designations. And of course, she is the 2020 NARPM National President. Kellie, thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe say hello. So I think.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for including me.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Next up, we do have Marc Cunningham. Marc has been in property management since before I was born. He is the president of Grace Property Management and Real Estate. He holds a degree in real estate and finance and was named the 2018 National Property Manager of the Year by Think Realty. He does consult for a number of PM companies. So for anyone who is interested afterwards, you can potentially get a little bit more of the lesson from Marc. Thank you, Marc, for joining us.
Happy to be here. Yeah, I've actually been in property management from before I was born. So
yeah, me too.
That was going to be my transition to Kit. Similar to Marc, she has been in it her entire life. So having been around her father's real estate company, she has been in it since she was
before I was born.
And so 1980, after she graduated from college, she did go to work in the family business and quickly gravitated towards property management. In 2010, she founded Maple Leaf Property Management, and in less than 10 years, she's grown the company to have over 1,000 properties in their portfolio. This next piece will be a little bit contentious, but she believes that the innovation and being able to adapt quickly has contributed to the development of the best property management team in the Pacific Northwest. Obviously, we have both Kellie
one of the best. One of the best.
and Nick as well, based out of the Pacific Northwest. So a great thing about the panel is we can have these different viewpoints that we can discuss at any time. So last and not least, we have Nicolas Cook. He's the founder of Sleep Sound Property Management out of Portland. He has over 15 years of experience in real estate and property management. He holds a globally recognized CPM designation through the Institute of Real Estate Management. He is a licensed principal broker in Oregon and a managing broker in Washington, so operating across multiple states. He earned his bachelor degree in real estate finance with a minor in real estate development, and he has a really great name. Nick, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, appreciate it, Nick. Good to be with you.
Likewise, great to have you. So to the audience, we do want to keep you very involved in this discussion. Throughout the session, if you have general questions or questions for a specific panelist, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll look to cover off on some of those at the end of this session. Marc threw it out to me, but we could talk about the post-COVID world for weeks on end. We just have 45 minutes, so we do want to prioritize the points that you want to discuss. So first, just going to throw a poll up there, and you can start voting for the things that you want to see discussed today. In the interim, I do want to just kick off the discussion as you guys vote for these topics. And Marc, I will start with you. As a Colorado-based PM, it sounds like you guys are going to be starting to reopen things. A lot of what we hear from these government and health officials is that things should be rolled out in phases. Are you thinking of that similar kind of phased approach with your company at all? And if so, what would those phases look like potentially?
We're not thinking of a phased rollout because we really haven't phased any type of closeout into our process. We've had to tweak processes, tweak things, but we've wanted to continue to make sure that we're doing everything we needed to do. And so we've had to make those changes. We're working remotely. Our office is closed to visitors, but we're still doing showings. Now by showings, I mean people can log in and they can watch a video of a property. So that's how we're getting our showings done. Earlier today, we had a leasing meeting with our full team, our weekly leasing meeting, and we had more activity this week on leasing, both on properties viewed through our website and leases signed than I think we've had in the last 10 months. So we're still operational. We plan on continuing 100%.
Got it. And I mean, you kind of mentioned how you've moved to these video tours. At what point do you start to go back towards self-showings or however else you guys have been leasing in the past?
For us in our markets, our real estate commission's been very tight with not allowing real estate agents, either from a sales standpoint or a property management standpoint, to do physical showings. So I think some of that's specific to individual markets. But I think from a lot of the PMs I've talked to, this idea of either doing video tours or doing tours like Showdigs offers, where an agent will take a person in, that's forced some PMs to enter that market who were scared of it before. And from everybody I've talked to that has done it, they've kind of been like, huh, that actually works pretty well. I think maybe we'll keep doing that.
Got it. So it is kind of looking at a continued use, and it's kind of one of the things that we'll potentially talk about later today. So thank you for that intro. Really interesting to kind of hear how you guys are thinking about things. We did get our votes in. It looks like the things that people are most interested in start with opportunities for growth. So Nick, I'll kind of point this one to you to kick off. How are you potentially looking at COVID as an opportunity to grow your business?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different fronts. One of them is there's a lot of people I think that have been self-managing, whether it's a house or an apartment building and so forth, that have really seen, some vulnerabilities in their process exposed. So not only is it just showing gaps in their ability to deploy services to the residents and communicate with the residents, but at least in Oregon, and probably true throughout the Northwest, there's been so much regulatory change. I mean, when this thing started, there was just a lot of disorganization among the cities. So for example, in our area, we had Portland, Beaverton, and Gresham all roll out different rules. And then the county rolled out a rule for Multnomah County, which is the largest county in Oregon. And then the state rolled out rules, and then the federal government rolled out rules. So in the span of basically 2 weeks, things shifted pretty heavily. And the problem is they didn't always contemplate a lot of the same issues. So some of those things have to do with around repayment or end of tenancy notices. So anyways, long story short, we're going to see this as a great opportunity to kind of educate people who may have been doing self-management to pivot to using management companies, and particularly us. And then also, this may be the straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of, management companies, to be honest. I mean, there may be a lot of property management companies that didn't build their portfolios in a way where they are able to service the properties, or maybe they're seeing higher default rates within their portfolio, which are going to have a major impact on their ability to survive. And we all know what the disaster the PPP program has been. So, we're kind of hopeful that this might get a few people to move forward with maybe exiting the business and selling their portfolio.
Got it. So kind of dual pronged there. Well, one, you're expecting kind of a shift from the DIYers to come into your guys' potential portfolio, and then a potential for acquisition. as you look at the DIY crowd, how do you think that you can potentially effectively market to that crowd? Like, what will those education tactics be?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple different ways, but one of the probably most immediate ways is to create content, whether it's through blogs or video blogs, maybe even doing sponsored content. But right now, there's a lot of people who are at home, first of all, so they're in front of a screen, so you have their attention like you may not otherwise. But again, there's no real playbook for some of these things. So there's a lot of, I think, people that are trying to find answers. And then there's also other areas you can engage in, like the Bigger Pockets community, other real estate forums. Obviously, you know, we're having stuff like this. So I think getting that kind of information out is one way to do it.
Mm-hmm. And Kellie, do you have kind of a similar thought process there on both of those points? And
Yeah, I do. One of the things that, you know, Nicolas Cook used the word pivot, and we've been using the word pivot and nimble quite a bit in our office. And I think those companies that, you know, the smaller or organizations that maybe don't have the procedures in place or the protocols in place to collect rent in an efficient way when it's not being collected, say they've always had, you know, people paying on time and in full, and now they haven't really had that opportunity to build those in. Those companies may have finding it a little bit harder to get where they need to be in order to collect their management fees and so on, and keep their companies going. And if you don't have as far to go to be nimble and pivot into what we need to be doing in this environment, then it's going to be more difficult. And that's where we've seen a lot of growth with our company, is that we have been able to change rapidly. We meet regularly, like Marc said, you know, meeting with our teams for the first, I think from the end of March until about a week ago, I was meeting with my property management team on, you know, who needs payment plans, who needs this, what are we doing here, and being nimble and able to adapt to whatever our tenants were looking for in order to stay viable. And I think that's going to be one of the growth areas. And then same with the showings. You know, if you can show more properties with less people, that means you can pull more on, grow your portfolio, and not have to have people driving around. And, you know, when the traffic gets back up to where it was, you know, in the Seattle metropolitan area, it's been a dream of no people on the road if you have to go somewhere. But certainly that's not a price that we want to pay, you know, for people to be back at work and so on. But yeah, being able to show more properties in less time is going to create growth within your company.
Mm-hmm. For those companies that fail to adapt, and it potentially looks like they may fail as a company, you know, it could be that they're looking for that lifeline. What do you think is the best way that they can make that known to the general community?
Well, gosh, there's so many social media platforms. The Facebook, you know, NARPM Facebook page, discussion group is probably one of the best, because those are NARPM, most of them are NARPM members, and that's who I'd want to do business with if I were looking to sell my company, is because we have a high ethical standard of how we do business, whether we're managing for other people or purchasing portfolios. That would be my first go-to spot. I'd also reach out to my colleagues locally as well and see, you know, and I guess if you've made the decision to get out of the business, then I'd reach out to my colleagues, but I'd also reach out to my colleagues to say, hey, how can I make my company through this? Where is my lifeline? Where is my anchor, or my lifeboat? Not my anchor. We don't want an anchor. I want a lifeboat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Marc, I think you've kind of dabbled in that arena. Do you have kind of a similar train of thought there as well?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think what's really going to happen is, and we've already seen this a little bit, because of all the craziness going on, we've had a lot of people who were planning on selling their house, right? They've had their house for sale, and all these sales agents out there are recommending their clients, don't sell, pause, just pause, just pause. Well, some of those people are saying, I can't pause, you know what, maybe I'll rent it. So now they're going to turn that property they were going to sell into a rental, which brings more business to us. But at the same time, we've already seen this as well. I think once all of this rolls through, you're going to have a significant number of landlords that we manage for right now that kind of got into this in the last couple of years, and they thought this is fun and this is sexy, and I watch HGTV, and like, who doesn't want a rental property? This is so cool. And all of a sudden the government tells them, hey, you can't evict your tenant for the next 4 months, whether they pay rent or not. And that scares a lot of people. So I think we're gonna have a significant number of people say, you know what?
Yeah.
This is not for me. This is too risky. I don't want to play this game. When I weather the storm, I'm out. So I think we'll just have a shift. We'll do a lot of work of bringing new people in. We'll have a group of people leave. And my personal view is we'll look back at the end of this year and say, I felt like I worked really hard this year and I treaded water all year.
Interesting perspective. And do you think that there's anything that you can do to retain those clients that do want to get out?
Well, what we're trying to do is buy some. So, we're investors ourselves. Talked to a guy just the other day. So if they want out, hey, who better to sell to than us? So I think this is an opportunity for those PMs that have always thought, gosh, I wish I could buy something. Man, there's never been a better time, because you have an opportunity, because of all the turmoil going on right now, to maybe talk to some of those clients who want to sell and offer them the ability to sell at a discounted rate because of this turmoil, and maybe add to your own portfolio, expand into that new part of your business that you've wanted to do.
I like it. And Kit, I know you own a lot of your own properties. Are you looking at things in the same way as Marc on that front? You're muted. Kit, you are.
I got
perfect.
it.
There we go.
I lost you guys for a while, so I missed part of the conversation. So I went blank. So I hope I'm not repeating anything here. But yeah, I mean, I definitely am looking. I'm currently in a couple markets down in Arizona and Eastern Washington and my Seattle market here. And so I've put the word out big time that, we're definitely in the market to pick up more properties. But we're also really, I've been talking to a lot of our owners who are also investors who are anxious to pick up properties in our market. And it's been really interesting. You were talking about some of these property management companies that might struggle because maybe they didn't have things in place. But I've had a number of calls from some of those companies that are not as innovative, that don't do things as remotely right now. And this is such an amazing opportunity for them to also really pick up and change things. I've really walked a couple people through with us, within like 48 hours, we were able to completely go remote. We took video tours and virtual tours of all our properties. We had Showdigs with FaceTime tours advertised immediately. We just changed up everything within like 48 hours. And how we do leases, we always do leases in person. We changed that up so that we're doing that over Zoom. So it's still an in-person experience. And so a couple of these companies in my market area that really struggled when this hit, I just really started throwing things out to them, Showdigs, all these different things that they could do. And this is an opportunity for them to change and to change quickly if they're daring enough. We were fortunate that we had all those things in place, but there's so many tools out there now with software programs and DocuSign and Showdigs and Rently, all these different things. There's so many tools for people to work completely remotely that, they need to lean in and embrace it.
And I appreciate all of the plugs there. Buried in there, I think I did hear kind of one unique avenue for growth that I certainly hadn't considered and that I don't think had previously been brought up, which is going back to your investors and seeing if they want to add additional properties, which can then lead to additional management. So I think that's a really interesting point that you raised there. Anyone else kind of have any final thoughts on growth? Otherwise, we can move on to another question or topic here.
Good to go.
Okay. So next most voted topic is to look at kind of the effects of unemployment and the recession on lease breaks and renewal rates, and kind of to understand what the effects of the movement of the whole ecosystem will look like. So Kellie, would love to hear kind of your thoughts. How do you think that tenants are going to be reacting to this?
Well, I'm hoping that the stimulus package and the unemployment will stop here pretty soon. I know in Colorado, you're getting back to some businesses, but we're not hearing that from the governor of Washington at all, that he'll be opening up anything. If he does, I think he's going to be elective surgeries and maybe some construction areas, residential construction, non-public construction, private construction. So I guess the downstream effects, lease breaks and renewal rates. Well, first of all, the governor's also determined that through this whole thing, we cannot raise rents. And we've been told, even on renewals, we just can't do any raising of rents. So that right there tells us, our renewal rates are going to stay the same if people are going to renew. Our goal is to simply keep people in their homes for at least another year if we can, and hopefully they'll be paying rent while they're there. We were fortunate enough in April, and I think a lot of people in our area and the Northwest, and actually across the country based on the NARPM survey that was sent out, they received, most people received over 90% of rent payments in full and on time in April. So we'll see what May brings. As far as the unemployment area, I just don't know. I mean, we've got some huge employers in our area that aren't, Boeing's letting people back to work, but very little at a time. I know all of the tech industries are pretty much working remotely. So it's just I think it's a crapshoot, and we just need to be prepared for anything and everything coming at us. And that's where that, being flexible and adaptive comes in.
Right. So very market specific.
Yeah, I think so. I wish I had an answer. I wish I had done this before. I could give you, well, this is what history shows us, but I don't.
And to click on Kellie, we can't charge lease break fees in Washington State either. So that has changed how we can't charge, if someone's moving out and breaking their lease, we can't charge them a lease break fee either. So the government has kind of dictated how we're handling all those.
Right, but if there's no lease break fee, there's cost to the owner as a result of that lease being broken. Are you saying those can't be charged either?
That's what they said. That's what was in the governor's proclamation, that there was no lease break fee, or you could not charge them any additional rent from the time that they moved out.
That's right. I do remember that. You're right. Yeah. So I'm sure there's a lot of other municipalities and areas, like Nick said, they're all over the board. So yeah, we have no leverage, and that leads back to why those folks are going to get out of the industry or get out of being investors, because it's just not, it's very difficult to work without any, I don't want to say leverage, but without anything behind what we're doing. It's like the Wild West.
Totally. So a little bit handcuffed by some of these government bodies.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, and Marc, kind of now going to direct this one to you. I watched all your YouTube videos before this, and it looks like you guys have kind of an approach to your renewal process that might help you work in phases to potentially get through some of these government handcuffs. How are you looking at things from your renewal process standpoint?
Well, we're approaching all of our decisions kind of on 3 criteria. Number one, we need to recognize the fact that legally we just can't do a lot of things right now, right? I mean, you can't evict. There's the CARE Act, so legally our hands are tied. Number one. Number two, when we do come out of this crisis, we don't want 40% vacancy, right? I mean, we need to keep good people the best we can, so we have to have that. And then number three, when we do come out of this as well, we want to be able to say we did what was right. Right? We did the right thing. We don't want to be that tough. Yeah, you didn't pay, get out. So with those 3 things in mind, we're making our decisions as it relates to lease renewals, as it relates to rent increases, as it relates to evictions, all those 3 things. So for lease renewals, for example, could we increase a rent right now on a lease renewal? Well, in our state, we could, but I think that's bad optics. It's that terrible PR to be doing that right now. So we could either offer a lease renewal flat, but if we do that, then that landlord loses 12 months of a lease renewal. 60 days ago, absolutely, we planned to up rents on lease renewals, but things got crazy. So 60, 90, 120 days from now, will they be a little bit more normal? Hopefully so. So what we've decided to do is just kind of pause the lease renewal process. We're going to let everybody go month to month right now. So instead of sending the letter saying, hey, your lease is up, we would love to have you renew, and here's your increase. We're going to say, hey, your lease is up because of the craziness. Let's just go month to month right now. And let's touch base in another 90 days. Your rent is not increasing right now. Let's just let this thing roll. Then once we hit 90 days from now, hopefully things are a little bit more normal. We can go back, negotiate a new lease with some type of an increase now. So that way the owner doesn't lose out on that full 12 month of rent increases that they were accounting on to offset their increased expenses.
Mm-hmm. And Nick, I'm not going to pretend that I know what's going on in Portland from a legislative standpoint, but do you kind of have a similar thought process to these 3 here as it relates to the renewal process?
So, we're in a bit of a bind in our state, largely due to some of the poor, decisions that our legislative bodies have made. And part of that has to do with a couple of things. But I guess I'll get into that in one quick second. As a general rule, I mean, we are to some degree pausing some of our lease renewal conversations. And then when it comes to increases, that's really going to be driven by the owner, right? At the end of the day, you know, we have kind of our recommendation based on the environment, but you know, we represent the owner of the property, and so it's pretty much up to them on how they want to proceed. Now, you know, obviously they're also being conservative in some regards, but really where Oregon becomes problematic is there's a lot of strict rules around timelines for lease renewals and for rent increases, not only because we have rent control in the state, which prohibits how, you know, often and how much you can raise the rent by, but also if you have a tenancy that's longer than a year, then you lose your ability to end that tenancy without cause, which makes it much more difficult to have a resident that maybe is not performing in other ways to be removed. And then if you are, you know, renting a single family house, for example, you may lose the ability to move back into the property, to sell the property unoccupied. So there's a lot of gray areas because, you know, the governor didn't contemplate the other rules that kind of run parallel to some of these, you know, moratoriums right now. So, you know, we're trying to figure out the best way to kind of navigate some of that stuff because we don't want to lose the window. However, you know, they kind of buried in this rule, which was supposed to be, hey, you can't terminate for non-payment. But when you look at it closely, it also includes you actually can't terminate for non-payment, and even if you have no cause, which is basically just a typical non-renewal notice saying, hey, it's the end of your rental agreement, we don't want to renew. That's prohibited as well, and you're subject to either, you know, civil or criminal charges if you do. So right now, that's kind of one of the things we're trying to crack open and figure out how to address for some of our clients. There's been some talk about maybe being able to notify the tenants of your intent to terminate, but not have an actual termination date set yet. But we're still looking into that as an option to proceed because there's going to be a pretty significant domino effect by holding up this process.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a recurring theme here of just always trying to navigate this legislation. One thing that you mentioned there is kind of letting these owners have a lot of impact in terms of how those renewals are getting set in terms of those price increases. I'm going to open this one up to the field. To what extent do you think there's going to be a downward pressure on rents in general? And how will you go about helping your owners navigate that from your standpoint as their managers?
Well,
Kellie.
I mean, my kind of take is we're probably going to see some downward pressure on rents for a short period of time. I would think that most likely, you know, over for the rest of the year, which maybe some people don't perceive as short, but ultimately the big question is how long does this go on for, right? We've talked a lot about April rent collection and, you know, forecasting May, but if we go into June without any additional stimulus, you know, now we're looking at a much more significant issue because one of the things that we're in a strong position of is the banks. The US banks are pretty well capitalized. They're coming into this crisis strong, which is pretty dramatically different than the 2008 crisis, but also even current European banks. But if you start to see, you know, loans shift over to the non-performing category, which will happen as time goes on, then we might be getting into a situation where businesses start having to have more layoffs or furloughs or whatever. So I think that's going to have a big impact and something that we'll just kind of have to see how it goes. But, you know, at the same time, some of it's going to be affected by property class, right? If you're a Class A new construction building, you're going to probably feel the pain first versus if you're a Class B or maybe even C property that's more affordable, you know, and then single family is going to be impacted differently than multifamily. And, you know, again, with everything in real estate, it's about location, what your local economy is like.
You know, it could have the opposite effect also, Nick, in that a lot of people that were planning on buying just are not going to be able to buy. They have now used their savings to live off of. Usually when we have a market that, you know, starts decreasing, we'll have more renters flood into the market. And that's going to create a situation where our rents could rise. So, you know, I just think it's almost impossible to tell what's going to happen. It will be very specific to people's different market areas also, but I think it's going to be really hard to tell, you know, if rents are going to go up or if they're going to go down because there's just, yeah, we have unemployment, but those people still need a place to live. And you know, we have these people that were going to buy a house and, oh, now they're going to rent because they still need a place to live. And it's kind of the beauty of rentals is that, you know, we don't always go along with what the market is doing. You know, often when the real estate market starts to go down, the property management market starts to increase. So, you know, it's just another good time to step in. The other thing I was going to comment on Marc's and Nicolas is on the lease extensions. We've taken a little bit different approach. Some of it is because we're in Seattle and we can't go month to month there pretty much. We only, because we have to do just cause. And so we have everyone on leases. And most of our owners were pretty nervous to do a rent increase, even if we could have. They felt like having someone in the property for the next year was a better thing than, you know, raising rent and having them move out. So a lot of our owners really wanted us just to do a year lease. Some of our other owners, we did like a 3-month lease, kind of similar to what Marc's doing with the month-to-month thing, only we have to do it on short leases. To just kind of put things on pause, you know, and see what happens. So I know that lots of times, you know, you don't communicate with your owners as much regarding lease extensions or price increases, but with us, we felt this was our time to really, once again, just communicate like crazy and let them be a part of the conversation.
Okay, we kind of did the same thing. We said the old saying, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. We figured if we had a tenant and we could keep him for another year at the existing rents, because we've always been keeping up with market rents, that was to the advantage of our client and the tenant, knowing they had a place to live and knew what the rates were going to be there and didn't have to move. Say that if it's on a month to month, well, again, this is a whole nother gray area. Let's say the owner loses their job. They want to move back into their house. We can't make the tenant move. We can't in the state of Washington, we can't give them any kind of notice that things are terminating or changing. So we decided to go on that aspect and then some of them, we're doing an escalation clause where we do the next 90 days or the first 90 days and we're doing renewals for July 1st right now. We have to give 60 days notice. So up until September 1st or October 1st, it's staying the same, and then an escalation clause for the remainder of the lease term, keeping a 12-month term, and a minor increase, nothing earth-shattering, but we went with that same perspective. And we try to pattern what we do kind of after Seattle in that we don't like month-to-month leases if we don't have to.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing I do want to just comment. So, I mean, in terms of you know, the position that property management tends to be kind of somewhat recession-proof, you know, and rentals can be that way. I think that can be true, but I do think that one of the things that's going to happen before any of that takes place is consolidation. So you're going to see households, especially if this extends for a period of time, you know, break leases because they probably have less to lose, and you're going to have people who maybe were renting a studio by themselves who are no longer going to do that. They're going to rent maybe a 2-bedroom with somebody else or a 3-bedroom house. I think that the housing supply is going to experience a lot of consolidation. And if you look at like a lot of the forecasts from like CBRE and Colliers and things like that around, you know, some of the apartment growth for rents, I mean, most of them are showing signs of, you know, decreasing rents, at least for the remainder of the year. So, you know, I think that, you know, from a long-term hold standpoint, it's probably fine, but the other thing too that we've never seen take place is, you know, essentially a moratorium on our ability to evict tenants for, you know, non-payment. So, I mean, that didn't even happen in the financial crisis. And so I think that's going to cause some pretty strong unintended consequences.
Got a question if I can, Nick. You know, Nicolas, Kellie, and Kit, you guys all kind of mentioned owners in those conversations we were having, right? My question would be, what degree of involvement are you giving your owners right now? Are you just kind of telling them what you're going to do from a communication standpoint, or are you saying, hey, what do you want to do? Because I've heard a lot of different conversations in our industry right now about that, hey, you've got to let the owner drive this and it's their property, let them decide. I'd be curious to know what position you guys are taking on that.
Well, we're making recommendations, but it's the reason why we're involving the owners more than we normally would is because some of our owners have been impacted more than our tenants. You know, some of our owners own restaurants, and so it's how each one of them and how we handle each one of them has been a little bit different. But you know, we're we're definitely, we know if an owner says they want to increase rent, you know, we're saying, no, we're not doing that right now. I mean, we're definitely driving the conversation, but we think during this time of uncertainty, it's really important that they feel some, what is the right word? Some stability.
Confident. They feel confident in us. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're communicating with them more than we always communicate with them, but just more on a personal level. Phone call. You know, there's been a lot of phone calls, and to both the owners and tenants. We started that off, and we don't usually, you know, do that often. But when we started this whole process, some of those property managers just got on the phone and started calling both their owners and their tenants just to check in. You know, so
yeah, we've done the same thing, and in this particular environment, there's so much information, and I'm not sure if it's like this in every state, but Governor Inslee, you know, did a declaration at the end of March, and then 10 days ago, he did another declaration adding more onto it, creating a lot of confusion. So what we did is we just did a video message out to all of our owners and said, here's what's going on. We've got this under control, you know, in a little bit of detail, not a lot of detail, but I wanted them to know that we know what we're doing and we know how to navigate this, and we're doing it one step at a time. There's a lot of fear out there in the media. I think I feel it coming at me that I should be afraid, and I wanted our clients to know that we've got this under control, and they can have confidence in what we're doing. And so we don't let them drive it. And like Kit, if they were to say we want to raise the rent, we respectfully say we can't do that. It's against the law right now, and here's what we can do. And we think another year lease at the existing rent is going to be to your benefit, because we don't know, like what Nick said, the rest of the year is going to bring as far as, you know, rent rates. So that's kind of how we've done it, and more communication, definitely. No phone calls yet, but some phone calls, but not a lot. We decided to go the video message route.
Yeah, and we've been proactive in certain fronts. I mean, one of the big questions in April, obviously, was, you know, is my resident going to pay? And what do we do if they can't pay? Because obviously it's like, well, the normal response is to start the eviction process, which has, you know, obviously been removed from our tool bag here. And so we were communicating to them essentially how we were going to navigate, you know, essentially rent collection for April and payment plans around those who can't pay in full. But when it comes to renewal conversations, I mean, we really do let our clients be the driver of that. I mean, we're here to advise, we're advisors, but these are their assets. And unless something's prohibited by law, then it's up to them to determine how they want to proceed. It's their investment and their risk to take on. And so, you know, again, we'll give them kind of the input, but we have always allowed them to participate in the renewal conversations because it is significant and it affects the valuation of the building, or if it's, you know, a single family home, then that's their only tenancy. So, you know, that's certainly something that we've allowed them to participate in and still do.
And Marc, how about on your side?
We have been very communicative. I mean, I think that communication's never been more important and needed than it is right now. But what we're communicating is very much in line of, here's what we're doing, here's why we're going to do it. So our business model is a little different than Nicolas's. Like we would not consider ourselves advisors from that standpoint, where our business model is more of a, you know, when you give me the keys, I will call you if the property burns down. And other than that, you'll get your money every month and let us do what we do. And so we appeal and we go after those owners who want to be hands off. So we're not having conversations with our owners on lease renewals by and large. We're doing what we do. As we decide the best course of action, we're informing our owners of what we're doing. And same thing on the current rental side of things with making payment arrangements and not, but we certainly don't want to be inviting opinions from owners who, given this law is tough enough for us to figure out, and we're the experts. So we don't want 50 different opinions on how we should be proceeding.
Mm-hmm. And I did see in one of your videos, it looks like you reached out to your owners and kind of gave them the option to give some of your tenants a rent break.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We reached out to all of our owners and said, hey, you know, here's within our first email out, hey, here, it was video. Here's the information. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. And by the way, If you are in a position where you're willing and able to assist your tenant and you want to give them a rent credit, maybe $50, $100, whatever, let us know. And we're happy to pass that on. Well, and what we also said then is if you do that, we will waive our management fee, right? So if you're we want to participate, we want some skin in the game. So if you're going to waive $100, we'll waive our management fee on the $100. Well, what we didn't realize is our owners would contribute $20,000 to free rent, anywhere from $50 to a month free. So we said, okay, well, our policy on that will stop in April. We don't want it. We need to keep our lights on. But you know what? Owners don't get enough credit. Landlords are good people. And when they have the ability to help out their tenants, by and large, they do it. And we were just really blown away with the generosity of our owners saying, yes, I want to help my tenant. How can I do it? And that was really cool and encouraging for us to see.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of generosity from our clients as well, being proactive about reaching out. And I think that actually goes to another point that we're trying to make really clear to them is, the housing industry has been targeted by the government largely just because, housing, a lot of people see as obviously being, critical to people's well-being, but you're not seeing that same type of approach being taken to grocery stores where grocery stores have to, sell food on consignment or credit or anything like that. I mean, they are being put in a position where, they can't evict and they can't collect rent and they have to take on all the liability, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's part of something that's just because it's politically popular for them to do that. And I think it's important for the owners to kind of show and talk to their officials about all the things that they are doing and what it means to be a housing provider. Because the reality is that the majority of our clients and residents, have a positive relationship. If you're looking at stats across the country, even though tenants essentially had a hall pass on paying rent in April and now through July, overwhelmingly the majority of them paid. Basically it's coming down to the fact, like, if you have the ability to pay, you pay, and that's what people are doing. And so I think that there's a lot more collaboration and motivation to work together on both sides than really the government's giving credit for. We've already seen a lot of these things occur in the marketplace and kind of precede any regulatory requirements. And I think sometimes the regulations can make it overly complicated. I understand why they're implementing some of these things, but to not do this in concert and to have so many different ordinances within different cities and counties and so forth has made it more difficult.
Right. And despite this collaboration, we hear that there are many property managers that aren't necessarily collecting nearly what they typically would, and, probably going to get worse over the next month or so. Kellie, how are you thinking that there may be kind of a shift in the industry around how property managers are screening tenants? Do you think that screening criteria will become more strict? What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's interesting. I think, I can recall back when in the, 2009 through 2010, and we had to shift and adjust our screening criteria because we weren't getting anybody into houses, and we had to make it work with what we were seeing. So, and when the city of Seattle changed to everything first in line, and now it's statewide first in line, we adjusted our screening criteria because if we have to accept the first one, we wanted it to be the best one. And so we had to up our screening criteria a little bit. So I suspect once we see things as they play out, there may be some adjusting. And when I say adjusting, it'll be more about the amount of income that's required to meet the income criteria to rent a property. That's the easiest one to adjust quickly. We're limited on the source of income. So now we'll have to include, like we always have, or recently, unemployment income will be part of that calculation. And so, yeah, I suspect if things change and if the market shifts, we need to be adjusting those screening criteria accordingly, or else we won't be able to put anybody in to the tenancy.
Interesting.
So.
And obviously Seattle is a bit restrictive. Nick, yours in Portland even more so. Marc,
well, we just got in the state of Washington, Nick, we just got payment plans will be approved for move-in funds up to 3 equal monthly payments for statewide. So that's something that we'll have to be adjusting to anyway. So the state's telling us how to do it rather than just letting the market bear what it will bear. So.
The continued theme.
Yes.
Marc, where you may not be as handcuffed in Colorado, what's kind of your perspective there?
On what we're going to see with rents?
With screening in particular, and
With
how
the
that may
screening side of
change
things? Well, I
upfront.
think that for any company, you can look at your rent collection right now. And if your rent collection is 90% as to what it normally would be, I think that directly points back to you doing a good job screening your applicants. If you look up now and say, gosh, only half my tenants paid rent, well, then your screening process was broken. You just didn't know it because the economy's been so good, everybody could pretty much pay. So I think that's a really good way for us as PMs to gauge how well our current screening process works based upon how many folks are currently paying right now. So will we tighten that up? Will we change that? I doubt it. It seems to be working. We've got enough folks paying, so I don't think that's going to factor right now into this whole thing. If a lot of tenants end up skipping or moving out or being evicted, you know, how are they going to come in and reapply? So I think that needs to be fluid. But for most companies that are still collecting rents, I think that speaks well to us as an industry that we're doing a good job of screening tenants and bringing quality tenants in.
And do you think that kind of comes back, kind of bring it back to the growth conversation? Do you think there's an opportunity to use that in your marketing efforts, either to these DIYers or to these owner investors that have been working with other property managers that didn't necessarily have that screening criteria in place?
Yeah, I think so. If you can talk to a prospective client and say, listen, during the last crisis, we collected 95% of the rent owed to us. That's a pretty impressive thing when you're talking to the self-managing landlord who managed 3 properties and none of his tenants paid. So yes, I think that is absolutely something we want to be using from a marketing standpoint.
So Nick, too, on that screening, I think 6 to 9 months from now, we're going to be looking at if people broke their lease, so some of the repercussions that actions will be taken now when people will be looking again. So maybe now they're moving in with family. Then 6 to 9 months from now, things get a little more solid. And they say, you know, there was a lease break on there. That kind of a review on their previous history may affect how we rent in a year from now, 6 months from now, or whatever. And I think that's something we need to be aware of. Kind of like how we looked at bankruptcies after, or strategic defaults after the housing crisis in 2008 and 10. So those are the kind of things I think we're going to be looking at down the road.
And what's kind of your expectation in terms of how you'll judge someone that did break their lease during this time frame?
Well, we have to play for, you have to toss fair housing in there. So you have to treat everybody equally the same, but every situation may be different. So, I think it just depends on what the circumstances were and, were they affected by COVID-19 because they lost their job as a result, or were they sick, or what happened is it's going to have to play a factor into it at some point. I think there's far-reaching effects of this disease than just what we're dealing with right now, is what I guess I'm saying.
Right.
Kind of on that same theme, Kelly, I do think us as an industry, we really need to put together some very reasonable payment plans.
Mm-hmm.
I see all these things on social media, how, landlords are just itching to get those pay and vacates out there. They just want the tenant out. They're mad they're not paying. And I just think that, we're all better than that. And that, these are people that are really suffering, and most of them made a good income before and are going to make a good income again. And, to just toss them out, I think is fairly irresponsible on our part also. I certainly know our owners don't want that. Our owners have been amazingly generous for the most part.
Right.
And so I think as an industry, it's going to be really important that we get the word out there that we are working with these tenants to come up with some reasonable plans, so over a 6-month period of time, or however they've got some time to get caught back up. I know that's a cash flow issue for the owners, but it's an unprecedented time.
And most of our clients that we've approached with payment plans with our tenants who need them have said, absolutely, whatever you guys need to do, just do what you need to do and keep them whole. And, their concern for the tenant has been paramount.
Yeah, I agree.
So agreed.
Nick, did you have any final thoughts there before we jump over to the Q&A?
Well, I would say that in terms of, screening and so forth. I think what Marc said, I'm going to echo that. The amount of tenants that are paying on time currently is a reflection of your screening criteria. And, we'll continue to try to strengthen that as much as we're permitted to do so. But in terms of rent collection and so forth, we sent out surveys in March asking, our residents if they foresaw interruptions in their ability to pay in April and May. And then, when we got that feedback back, we sent out basically, a second survey saying, well, how much do you think you can pay if you aren't able to pay in full? And then we gave them 4 different payment options for the remainder of the amount, just so that we can continue the conversation. And it's actually gone really smooth, and we're sending out our survey again today for May and June. But yeah, I mean, a lot of our clients are wanting to be cooperative, but we decided we'd start the conversation with residents first before we bring it to, the owners, so we actually have some tangible answers and so forth. We're not just shooting in the dark. But I mean, it's in everyone's benefit by and large to, keep people in the homes for a variety of reasons. And, I think that as long as people can be cooperative in that manner, they will. But, if this goes on for, past June, we're gonna have to see some pretty dramatic changes from how the government's approaching this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, moving to the Q&A. I'm going to throw this up there, and I hope you guys can see this, but I'll still read it out loud. Nick, this first question is for you. How are you handling rent increases that are going into effect in May/June that were sent out pre-COVID-19 with 90-day notice?
I mean, kind of going back to, our obligation, to maximize, rents for the property, it's one of those things that if we're not hearing from the resident about an issue, then we're not doing anything. If they're raising a red flag about an issue, then we'll open that conversation up with the owner to kind of determine how they want to proceed. But if we've sent out those notices and they're going into effect and no one's turned around and said, hey, I'm worried about this, we're just moving forward as planned. Because, we are seeing a fairly good amount of collection in our portfolio, and, not everyone's lost their job. So, if they have a reason to be concerned, then we're certainly communicating with them and then the owners at that point.
And to the other 3 panelists, kind of similar approach on your side? Anyone doing anything differently?
Right. We've had these conversations with our, oh, I'm sorry, Kit, go ahead.
That's okay. No, we just extended. I was like, we had some that were supposed to be going into effect 1st of June, 1st of May. And we just changed that up because right now in our state, I believe, I can't keep track, it changes so often. I think it's June 4th. We can't raise rents until right now, the current date is June 4th. So on some of those that were supposed to be going into effect like the 1st of May, we've extended those out. So they're going to go into effect the 1st of July. So, we're just kind of moving them out. And we'll just keep doing that. I mean, if our moratorium gets extended another month, where we can't raise rents, we'll just do the same thing. Sorry.
Same here. If we're letting it ride, and these are conversations that we had 60 days ago, 60, 75 days ago. So, and half of them are already in place and signed and fully executed. So unless they're coming back to us, we're letting it ride. And then following the from now on type of deal.
Right. Marc, anything different on your side?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. Thank you, Philip, for that question. The next question from Corey Brewer. Assuming that your management agreement allows it, are you still charging your client the full management fee for the month, even if they decide to discount or fully waive rent for their tenant? We heard Marc kind of reference that earlier.
With regret, no. Yeah.
We're charging our clients. I mean, the reality is that we have people that work here and perform all the tasks related to property management. They have to be paid. We are not equity owners in the majority of the properties that we manage, and therefore, we don't get to necessarily benefit in the upside. So we're certainly not in a position to benefit in the downside. So yeah, in this particular case, I mean, if an owner is in a position to do that, we would still charge our fee, which is really no different than what we would do if somebody was offering like a concession, right? So they have a normal vacancy and they wanted to offer a concession. We're not going to discount our fee so that, they can provide a concession. That's part of their business operating cost.
So our management agreement says that, it's based on the percentage of income. So if someone hasn't paid rent, we don't get paid. Some of our owners have voluntarily come to us and said, we want you to get paid. So just, put the management fee on there. I have some of our property managers are talking to some of the owners, seeing if they want to, because we'll eventually get that when the tenant pays. Do they, do they want to wait until that point, or can we go ahead and charge now? But when your management agreement says you are paid according to percentage, it's of rents collected. It is what it is. So.
Okay, Corey, I hope that answered that question for you. Chris, you've asked us a question from California. We'll circle back with you on that one separately. A question from Shelby Foster. Kit, why do you do leases in person?
Well, I think it's one of the, I have probably one of the strongest opinions about that. And I know most of my colleagues do not do them in person. So I think the only way you can completely set up a tenancy is to sit across the table from someone and go through that lease. We don't do it line by line, but we do it. Our lease is long, and we have pictures. We have pictures of how a toilet should not be clogged up, and how a drain should not be clogged up, and what they're going to be charged for if they call us and there's hair in that drain and all that. We go over all those issues that become issues later on. We go over in person. So we had to really scramble, and we really feel that because we do that, it does set up the tenancy, and there's not as many issues. It sets up the relationship. And so we're on a team together on this. But when this all happened, that was impossible to do. And so what we did was we immediately went to Zoom, because you can share your screen. And we still did it in person, only over the screen, signing, and went over the same thing. And it has been really good. My property managers have really liked it. And it does give us maybe the option, or it has opened our eyes a bit to that sometimes, we can do it that way. It doesn't have to necessarily be across the table, but it's still very important, I believe, that your voice is heard and those tenants understand what the expectation is of that tenancy. That's why we do it in person.
So a lot of setting expectations. Do you want to at all continue doing some of this through Zoom post-COVID?
We might. It does. The good part about it is it does allow us to maybe take on properties that are even a little bit further out of our market area where it's harder for those tenants to either come into our office to do a lease signing or whatever. So yeah, it does open up some possibilities, but still gives us the same effect that we were trying to get, which was kind of that in-person lease signing, only it's over a screen instead.
Totally. Corey has a couple more questions that are a little bit Washington specific, so we may circle back to those, Corey, but hoping to get a couple more answered that are a little bit broader to the audience. Joel has a question. What are some tactics, techniques, and procedures you are using within your company to maintain and enhance team culture with your team working remotely?
It's a great question.
Hey, Joel. I'm glad you could join us today. We were just talking before we went live. The bunch of us are doing a lot of different things. We're actually doing a kind of a team game day night, 4 o'clock today. We're playing a game called Farkle. It's a dice game, and anybody can play it. You can play it with as many people as you want, and bring your favorite beverage, and we're going to do a Zoom game. We've been doing team meetings for different departments. We have an HOA department, and so we do team meetings regularly, probably more, but they're quicker and shorter and sweeter than they would be if we were in the office. So, and I've been sending out goofy things to the team. We do use Teams on Outlook, and so periodically I'll send a song, off of YouTube, say, here's something to put a little pep in your step, and it's, on certain days. On Monday, I sent out a little Rastafarian song by Bob Marley. If those of you that know what 420 is, just as a joke, and the team thought it was pretty funny. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing. Just kind of get creative.
We're also connected by Zoom like all day long. So everyone in admin is kind of required to be on Zoom all day, and the property managers come in and out. They come in sometimes to just ask questions or to kind of hang out. So every morning a link goes out to everybody in the company at between 8 and 9 o'clock, and it gets turned back off between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. So people have the opportunity to, you know, like I'm on it all day long, my office manager's on it all day long, our accounting people are on it all day long. And so the managers or anybody else can come in and out and talk and ask questions. And so we kind of have our little virtual office has office hours, 9 to 3, like every day. So I think it's helped a lot.
For us, with our people being out of the office, I think it's really important for any PM company. This is a really good test to make sure you are aligned with your team members, with your employees on what the priorities are. Because it's easier to do when they're in the office and you can, you know, look across the desk and say, hey, work on this thing over here. But when you truly aren't seeing them face to face, it's really valuable and important to make sure, hey, these are the new priorities. And maybe your priorities have changed because of all the craziness going on. So communication to those team members who are working remotely is more important now than ever. I was talking to a company owner just the other day, and we were talking about team members working remotely. And he said, Marc, do you really believe your team members are working when they're at the house? And I said, well, yeah, I don't just believe they are, but we have accountability in place, right? And that's why you want those tight systems in place so that you can still confirm, yes, the job is still getting done. The tasks are still getting done. And you have that positive accountability so that you can ensure that the boxes are getting checked, the leases are getting signed, the calls are getting returned on that side of things. And then as it relates to your communication, it's been real effective for us to do the team Zoom meetings. We make everybody turn their camera on so we can see who hasn't combed their hair that day. And also one-on-ones, weekly one-on-ones. I mean, to whatever level of communication you were doing previously with your team members, it probably should be doubled. So every week, every one of our team members is doing this fashion of a one-on-one with whoever they report to go through feedback, to talk about the aspects. That's just been paramount for us to make this work as well as it has.
Yeah, and you know, for us, I mean, we have a daily huddle that we do as a team. So we've been doing that via Zoom versus obviously in person. So that helps kind of keep us a little bit engaged. We have a, you know, hour-and-a-half weekly meeting we do as a team. And to be honest, you know, at any given time, about a third of our team has been working remotely for the last, you know, almost 2 years. So we were able to kind of slip into kind of just our normal operating procedures pretty easily. One thing that we did to kind of introduce a little bit of fun is introduce something called Meme Monday. So where there's kind of an in-house competition on who can make the best property management memes and submit those on Monday and do a little vote on that and get some humor, because our industry has plenty of it. You know, we always kind of say that you know, there's shows out there like Parks and Rec and The Office, and I assure you there could be one on property management. It hasn't happened yet, but very easily that could be the case.
It's a brilliant idea. And Nick, it sounds like you guys have enjoyed the kind of remote style. Do you kind of see yourself moving into a more permanent remote style company?
You know, in certain respects, I think we'll probably increase the amount of remote activity that we permit for sure. You know, there's been a lot of benefits, and in some ways you know, I think it's allowed people to focus a little bit more, to be honest, because they don't have as many interruptions, somebody walking over to their desk or to their office and things like that. So it's actually quite interesting. And one of the things that we were actually looking at trying to measure maybe more from an objective, you know, data standpoint, and looking at some of the applications out there like, you know, Time Doctor or Hubstack to really see like, you know, are people actually more efficient? Because I've had several people come and say, hey, I'm getting a lot more done than I ever did in the office. And, you know, we're in one of those businesses, if you're not doing your job, it shows up real quick too.
One more comment on that, if I may. You know, we reached out to our team members early on when this was starting to go on, and all the news is paranoia. And we let them know that, listen, you know, guys, you read the stuff and the crazy things going on, like, we're solid, right? Our company is solid. We're not going anywhere. So don't let that be a worry for you. As you're finding your friends are laid off and you're reading the news and everybody's closing down, that's not going to happen here. Regardless of what happens in the next 30, 60, 90 days financially, we're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Nobody's getting laid off. And we even kind of took that a step further and said, you know, a lot of the compensation that you guys as team members make is based on income we bring in. You know, more late fees we bring in, the more you get. The more lease fees we bring in, the more you get. And we know that's going to take a hit this month. So for April, we kind of came up with a dollar amount. We said, when you get your April check, everybody's going to have a bonus of X on that, because we want to take care of our folks. We want to let them know that they're solid. because that's important to us. And we've been conservative in the way we operate so we can weather this storm. So I think that goes to that aspect of letting people know that, oh, I've got enough to worry about. I don't need to worry about getting laid off.
I agree with that, Mark. Just one real quick takeaway that we got in the accountability phase, and not, knowing if your employees, because that's one of the reasons why we haven't had remote employees. We have trouble with thinking if they're really going to be working. So we implemented a end of day report or a close of business report, and we kind of let everybody kind of create their own, and it gives them the accountability and the sense of the fact that they've gotten a lot accomplished. Because I think sometimes when you're at home, you feel like you're not necessarily accomplishing as much as you would be at work. But so most everybody puts in a close of business report at the end of their day. And it's been really helpful for me to see what they're doing, their manager to see what they're doing, and then kind of just get a feel for them to see that, wow, look how much I'm getting done. So it's kind of a mutually agreeable or mutually beneficial type program. So that's worked really well for the accountability.
Fantastic. Well, we are 6 minutes over. We have 14 questions left, and I do want to be respectful of our panelists' time. So as much as they're willing, I'm going to follow up with them with some of these questions and see if they'll provide some written answers. We will be sending out a recording of this to anybody who is registered for the event. And like I said, if we do get some answers back from the panelists on some of these other questions, can share them as well. Marc, Nick, Kelly, Kit, thank you guys so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the time.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.